The cold case of a beloved New York aunt is finally solved after more than 6 decades, thanks to DNA testing. On September 13, 1964, the beloved 50-year-old Catherine Bick Blackburn was showing her apartment on Colony Street in Albany, New York, to potential renters. In a twist of events, she was struck in the back of the head and stabbed in the neck, then molested while she was unconscious before the perpetrator heated up several steak knives on her gas stove and burned shapes into her lips and chest. She was bludgeoned, assaulted, and tortured with heated kitchen knives for hours. The attack was so vicious that she lost her life from blood loss rather than the assaults on her body. The next morning, a co-worker of Catherine's attempted to pick her up to go to work, and upon arriving at her residence and not receiving any acknowledgement of being home, she contacted Catherine's niece, Sandra Carmichael, to try to figure out what was going on. Sandra and Catherine's other sister responded to the address and came across the gruesome scene. Several law enforcement agencies responded to the scene, including the Albany Police Department, and an investigation was opened. The investigators collected a significant amount of evidence, including blood samples, a footprint in the yard, and slips of paper believed to be connected to the perpetrator. Catherine was a foreman at the Fuller Brush Company. She was separated from her husband, who was an Air Corps veteran working in Japan. She wanted to rent out a room in her home. The investigators learned that Catherine had recently canceled newspaper ads to rent out the room and painted the rental unit the same weekend she was slain. The investigators found a slip of paper with the same numbers as the house, 117, and a receipt torn from Catherine's receipt book. The investigators were able to read the name Robert Broadhead on the missing receipt by examining pen impressions on the next sheet of paper in the book. That name did not lead to any known person and was determined to likely be fictitious. Despite an extensive investigation that went on for years, the case went cold and no suspect was identified. In 2018, after more than 5 decades, Albany Police Department's forensics detective, Melissa Morey, took over the investigation and reached out to Dr. Christina Lane, the head of the Cold Case Analysis Center at the College of St. Rose. Lane and Morey paired up on what turned into a years-long investigation. The two learned through trial and error, including participating in a 2019 podcast on unsolved cases in the Capital Region. The hope was that the podcast would generate new interest in the case. In the end, they regrouped and realized that they had to focus on the evidence at hand. The key piece of evidence that led to the breakthrough was a handkerchief that the detectives recovered from beneath Catherine's body. The cloth was sent to Othram. A DNA sample was recovered through a wet vacuuming system designed to lift DNA from porous surfaces. Scientists at Othram then built a DNA profile for the subject, and it was turned over to the FBI's Forensic Genetic Genealogy team. The team came up with a genetic match of relatives from a database. The investigators tracked down relatives of the suspect who gave DNA samples, allowing them to finally crack the case. Using this evidence preserved from the decades-old case, the police were able to identify a potential suspect as Joseph Nowakowski. On September 14, 2025, 61 years and 1 day after Catherine's mutilated body was found, Joseph's remains were exhumed from his grave in Albany Rural Cemetery. The investigators took a DNA sample from his femur and his arm and sent them to a lab for testing. Weeks later, the answer came back. The sample from Nowakowski's body matched the DNA left behind in Catherine's home. Nowakowski was 37 years old at the time of the 1964 crime. He passed away in 1998 after several stints in prison. He was convicted of a similar assault of an elderly woman in Schenectady in 1973, and the officials believe that he is likely connected to other criminal cases in the area. He was released from state prison in 1980 and lived under the radar until his demise nearly 20 years later. Catherine's other niece, Marianne Simard, said, "Our Aunt Kate loved her faith, family, and friends. She was a daughter, sister, aunt, and neighbor. The crime against Catherine was one of the state's most horrific cases." Sandra said, "We have prayed for this day. To all who made this possible, May God bless all of you and may my aunt rest in peace. 61 years ago, evil entered my aunt's house. It changed our lives forever. 3 people's lives were taken while they were on a road trip in Australia. The perpetrator was finally identified. In 1978, Karen Edwards was 23 years old. She was a trainee medical psychologist from Dandenong, Victoria. Tim Thomson was 31 years old, a teacher working in a remote community, Hermansburg, Northern Territory, and originally from New Zealand. Gordon Twaddle was 21 or 22 at the time, also from New Zealand, working in Central Australia. The 3 were close friends and shared a passion for motorcycles. On October 2, 1978, the trio left Alice Springs with Tim's Doberman dog, Tristy, intending to ride through Central Australia and on to Melbourne for Christmas. They traveled via Aileron, Tea Tree, Devil's Marbles, the Three Ways, Fruina, and Berry Caves. They each rode distinctive motorcycles. Tim and Karen on a red 1977 BMW 100S with the sidecar for the dog, and Gordon on a blue 1977 Suzuki GS 750. 2 days later, on October 4th, they arrived at the Moondara Caravan Park in Mount Isa, Queensland, and checked in. On October 5th, they were seen leaving the caravan park in the morning in a brown and white Toyota Land Cruiser with an unidentified man. The bikes and dog were left behind. That same day, the vehicle returned. On October 6th, the campsite had been packed up. Tristy was discovered wandering near the Mount Isa dump, along with their motorcycle helmets and personal belongings, hidden in a 44-gallon drum. The locals recognized Tristy as belonging to the missing travelers. Gordon's motorcycle was abandoned at a Mount Isa service station with the keys still in the ignition, while Tim's red BMW bike was discovered at the home of a local man, Bruce John Preston. Preston, who was also traveling around Australia in 1978, admitted to stealing the bike and was fined $300. For nearly 3 weeks, no one heard from the trio. Their families, unaware of their disappearance, assumed that they were continuing their trip through the outback. On October 24th, a couple who were exercising their greyhound dog near a dry waterway called Spear Creek, about 12 kilometers north of Mount Isa, stumbled upon a body as they were racing after their dog chasing a wild pig. That body was later identified as Tim Thomson. The next day, the bodies of Karen Edwards and Gordon Twaddle were located in bushland, about 50 meters away, hidden in spinifex grass. The autopsies revealed that all 3 victims had gunshot wounds to the head, fired from a .22 caliber rifle. The victims were fully clothed, identification removed, pockets turned inside out, and left in remote bushland to decompose. The police launched an investigation. The investigators have long identified the brown and white Toyota Land Cruiser as pivotal. The man that picked up the trio in that vehicle was described as dark-haired, bearded, medium build. Despite intensive efforts, the perpetrator could not be identified, and the case went cold. For more than 4 decades, the families of Karen, Tim, and Gordon pushed for answers, and finally in 2019, a breakthrough came. In April 2019, the detectives arrested 63-year-old Bruce John Preston from Goulburn, New South Wales. He was charged with 3 counts of slaying in relation to the case after new evidence allegedly linked him to the case. Preston was the man who had stolen one of the bikes and once owned a similar Toyota Land Cruiser. However, in July 2023, the Crown dropped all charges against him due to insufficient evidence. The families of the victims were heartbroken and frustrated that the case remained unsolved. A second inquest began on October 7, 2025, examining both the original 1980 inquest and the renewed investigation. Part of the reopened inquest has focused on the former accused Bruce John Preston. He has been linked to the investigation from almost the beginning after being caught in possession of Tim's missing red BMW motorbike a month after the slayings. Preston's older brother, Ian Preston, told the court that Preston was a member of the Black Ulan's outlaw bike gang at the time of the crime. He recalls his nickname in those circles was Pedro, and reading that name on his jacket. As questioning continued, Ian was threatened with perjury before being granted indemnity against future prosecution over fears his brother was involved in the case. He said, "I was concerned that such a thing had happened initially, and in some way, shape, or form, that my brother may have been implicated in it, by virtue of the fact that what went on in Mount Isa at the time." Ian said that he had discussed the case with his family, but denied evidence that his father, who has since passed away, admitted that Preston was the perpetrator. The inquest was told that his father, Arthur Preston, had said, "The little bastard done it, but he is a tough little bastard. They cannot break him." Ian said that his father was a hard man, and it was language he would have used, but he denied first-hand knowledge of the admission. He conceded that the entire family were hunters and very familiar with guns, describing his brother as a crack shot. The brief of evidence is extensive, 100-plus lever arch folders, 200-plus witness statements, and the investigator said that it remains ongoing. A reward of 250,000 Australian dollars is still offered for information leading to a conviction. What remains unknown is, who exactly was the driver of the Land Cruiser? Why the trio left with him, and what was the motive for the triple slaying? And how exactly did the events between their last sighting and their demises unfold, and where, when, and how were they shot? After 27 years, the mystery of baby Jane Doe and her tragic end have almost been solved, and the person responsible will face justice. In June 1998, the remains of an unidentified infant were found near Fisher Lake in Longview, Texas. Longview police had responded to the area of West Harrison Road and Jordan Valley Road after the deceased newborn was found in a field near the intersection. The detectives began collecting evidence, and an autopsy showed that the child's life was ended. Despite an extensive investigation and public assistance, neither the baby nor the parents could be identified, and the baby became known as Gregg County Baby Jane Doe 1998. She was buried at Grace Hill Cemetery in Longview. Details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System in March 2015. In May 2025, 27 years later, with funding provided by Project 525, the Longview Police Department submitted forensic evidence to Othram to determine if advanced DNA testing could help identify the child. Othram scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the provided evidence and then used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the newborn. Othram's in-house forensic genetic genealogy team used the profile in a genetic genealogy search to develop new investigative leads that were returned to law enforcement. This investigation led to the positive identification of the mother of the baby, who is now known to be 47-year-old Misty Marie Mitchell. Mitchell was interviewed by the detectives and admitted to being the child's mother. In September, based on that information, the detectives arrested Mitchell for capital slaying of person under 10 years old. The case remains under investigation, and anyone with additional information is encouraged to call the Longview Police Department Criminal Investigations Division at 9032371110. Mitchell remains in the Gregg County Jail, with her bond set at $750,000. The remains of a Central Ohio man found deceased in Franklin County over 35 years ago has been identified thanks to forensic genealogy. On November 3, 1989, the remains of an unidentified man were found in Columbus, Ohio. The Columbus Police Department responded and began collecting evidence and started investigating. The investigators recovered the remains, which were found behind a fence approximately 500 feet off the roadway near 3001 Walcott Road in Franklin County. The Franklin County Coroner's Office determined that the man was white, stood about 5 feet 7 inches, and was likely 45 to 55 years old. He was wearing blue pants and a white belt. Despite a lengthy investigation, the man could not be identified, and he became known as Franklin County John Doe, 1989. Details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, but the case went cold for many years. A deep dive investigation into the man's identity began after a decade, in 2000, after the Franklin County Coroner's Office submitted the remains to BCI investigators. They used Project Link, an initiative that collects DNA samples from unidentified human remains and from people with missing loved ones in hopes of finding a match. 0 leads were generated for over 20 years, but in 2024, Porchlight Project, a nonprofit organization which funds forensic genealogy for families of the missing and slain, assisted in the investigation. A family tree was built to help locate a close relative of the victim, and a DNA match was used to confirm his identity. Early the following year, in 2025, the Franklin County Coroner's Office collaborated with the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation to submit forensic evidence to Othram. They wanted to determine if advanced DNA testing could help identify the man. Othram scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the provided evidence and then used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile for the man, which were new investigative leads that were returned to law enforcement. Working with law enforcement, the Porchlight Project's forensic genetic genealogist worked to develop new leads in the case. Using this new information, a follow-up investigation was conducted, leading investigators to potential relatives of the man. In mid-2025, DNA samples were collected from a relative and was compared to the DNA profile of the unidentified man. The man was then positively identified as Ernest Emerson Carter, who was born in 1923. Franklin County Coroner Nathan Overmeyer said in a statement, "We believe each person is worthy of dignity and respect. Our patients can no longer advocate for themselves, so we must on their behalf. I am extremely proud of the compassionate, talented staff who worked on this case from my office, BCI, and our community partners. Together, we were able to utilize science to solve a mystery." Very little is known about Ernest's life or how his life ended. The investigation is still open. A woman that was found in the Arizona desert 5 decades ago, known only as Jane Doe, has finally been identified thanks to new DNA testing. Skeletal remains were found on April 25, 1972, in Pima County, Arizona. The woman was believed to have lost her life between 1959 and 1965. She was found near her straw purse, a bus ticket, and a couple of cigarettes. The investigators believe that her body could have been in the desert for several years before she was found. Her case was uploaded onto the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, but the case remained cold for 53 years. Until September of 2025, when NamUs highlighted that the 1972 discovery of skeletal remains is still seen as an active case. In the past, the investigators relied on missing persons flyers, word of mouth, law enforcement networks, and even recreation of remains to try and learn a person's identity. In October, the officials were able to finally identify her as Mary Marlovitz, a woman with ties to Erie, Pennsylvania. Retired Detective Chris McMullen, his wife, and 2 other retired detectives founded the Cold Case Initiative as a nonprofit that funds DNA and genetic research to identify those who have no known name. Detective McMullen said, "I do not like seeing people in a grave where it says Jane Doe or John Doe. I think they really deserve their name. It is closure on some level. It may not be 100%, but it is a step in the right direction." He also said that identifying a person is the first step in learning what happened to them. A cold case that lingered for more than half a century in Will County, Illinois, has been solved thanks to the dedication of the detectives and new DNA technologies. On September 30th, 1968, highway workers found the skeletal remains of an unidentified woman in the woods along Interstate 55 near Blodgett Road in unincorporated Will County. The woman's body was found despite being partially covered by brush from a nearby tree. The Will County Sheriff's Police Department responded and began investigating. There was no identification, clothing, or jewelry found on or near the remains. The unidentified nude woman was 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighed 135 pounds. She had straight, collar-length hair with color ranging from red to medium brown, and some graying roots indicating that her hair was dyed. The unknown woman had brown eyes and both of her ears were pierced. an autopsy was performed by the Will County Coroner's Office, which determined that the woman had been strangled and sustained blunt force trauma to the head. The authorities estimated that she was slain approximately 48 hours before she was found. Fingerprints were obtained by the investigators at the autopsy, but the prints did not lead to the identity of the woman. DNA analysis was not available in 1968, but a blood sample was tested and indicated that she had type O blood. Despite a lengthy investigation, the woman could not be identified, and the case went cold. She was buried in Oakwood Cemetery in Wilmington, Illinois. Details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. 4 decades later, in 2008, then Will County Coroner Patrick K. O'Neill created a part-time cold case unit. This unit had investigated leads in this case along with investigators with the Will County Sheriff's Office. In 2009, the unknown woman's remains were exhumed to obtain a DNA sample and sent to the University of North Texas and later to the Smithsonian Institute Paleontology section. While it was determined that the woman may have been Native American, her identity was still a mystery. Further studies in 2017 at the University of Illinois Forensic Anthropology Department indicated the woman's Asian ancestry and/or Native American ancestry. In 2020, newly elected coroner Lori H. Summers made it a priority to utilize new emerging technologies, along with traditional investigative techniques, with the current cold case investigation being led by retired investigators Joseph Piper and William Sheehan from Lockport, Illinois. A forensic sketch of what the woman may have looked like was created and distributed, and it was also uploaded to NamUs in 2020. In 2021, the Will County Coroner's Office, as part of an ongoing collaboration with Othram, submitted forensic evidence to Othram's lab. Othram's scientists were able to extract a DNA sample from this evidence and used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile. Othram's in-house forensic genetic genealogy team used the profile in a genetic genealogy search to develop new investigative leads that were returned to law enforcement. Using this new information, a follow-up investigation was conducted, leading investigators to Native American tribes in Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa. They inquired about any missing person reports from the late 1960s that matched the victim's description. Cooperation with the Bureau of Indian Affairs was instrumental, and they were able to create and disseminate a flyer that was published on social media and distributed within Native communities. This outreach led to a woman in Washington who believed that she was a distant relative of the unknown woman. The woman in Washington was able to make contact with a niece who provided a reference DNA sample to compare to the DNA profile of the unknown woman using KINS-NP rapid relationship testing. By July 2025, this investigation led to the positive identification of the woman, who is now known to be Martha Bassett, who was 33 years old when her life was ended. Martha was born in Washington and was a member of the Native American community from Wapato in Yakima County, Washington. She attended Wapato High School, where she was a member of the Girls Athletic Club. Members participated in softball, tumbling, ping pong, badminton, basketball, and volleyball, with the goal of earning enough points to win a letter. She was also in the school chorus and was a member of the Girls Club. After graduating from Wapato High School in 1955, Martha sought more education. She attended Yakima Business College and studied English, shorthand, typing, office practice, and penmanship. Martha enjoyed photography, was a skilled seamstress, and was an avid reader. She had moved to Chicago in 1957 through the Bureau of Indian Affairs Relocation Program, a federal initiative established under the Indian Relocation Act of 1956. She used those skills working as a teletype operator for the Western Union Telegraph Company in Chicago, a role she held for more than a decade. By 1967, Martha lost contact with her family, who were concerned for her welfare. They traveled to Chicago in an effort to find her, but their search was fruitless, and they returned home without answers. The Will County Coroner's Office said, "Martha Bassett's identity, lost to history for more than half a century, has been restored, allowing her family and community to honor her memory and finally lay her to rest." The case stands as a testament to what can be achieved when modern technology is applied with compassion and resolve, and it offers hope to the families of other missing persons that answers, though sometimes delayed, can still be found. Relatives had traveled to the Chicago area in September 2025 to meet with the coroner's office authorities and others who worked to identify her. Her remains were flown from Midway International Airport in Chicago to SeaTac, then transported to Valley Hills Funeral Home in Wapato. Her family members also flew home. Martha was taken from Valley Hills Funeral Home to the Toppenish Creek Longhouse south of White Swan. After traditional evening services and a meal, she was buried the next morning at the Union Gap Cemetery. Asa Washines was among family members who traveled to Chicago. In a social media post, he encouraged others to come to the Longhouse for the proper services Martha did not receive 56 years ago and thanked people for their support and prayers. Martha is no longer missing, but plenty of questions still need to be answered. It is just the beginning of the story. There is an investigation to determine what happened to her,